Now, as former Democratic presidential candidate himself and former Ohio Congressman and Fox News contributor Dennis Kucinich. Also with us is former Illinois Congressman Joe Walsh. Gentlemen, good to see you. Thanks very much for joining us. Let me get your reaction. Congressman Kucinich, kick us off right here.
Look, the increased vetting can be done without an executive order. They could have done this without creating the kind of chaos and fear that is moving across this country and apparently affecting other countries as well. There cannot be a religious-based test, according to our Constitution. The essence of America is pluralism, and I think that's why the protests are occurring, because it goes beyond this ban. It goes right to who we are as Americans, and that's something we must never forget. Yeah,
but Congressman Walsh, he said it's not a religious ban.
It's not, and you're right, Maria. It's not a religious ban. We're talking about 7 countries. The hysteria this morning and all weekend is incredible. This is a course correction. After years of political correctness in dealing with Islam, President Trump is following through with his promise. And we are finally going to act like adults and protect the American people. The hysteria, Maria, is just beyond the pale. I think regular Americans are nodding their heads. They understand what Trump is doing here.
What do you think, Tegan?
I think that some of the Trump administration and the way that this was rolled out, that they need to, in part, own some of the chaos that was created, because people, even people who work within the government, who work within customs and immigration, were in the dark about how to implement this. And I think that that is the bigger problem, rather than coming out and really explaining what was in effect and what was happening. It was very unclear, and so the Trump administration now is back on its heels in a position, at least from a PR perspective, that you never want to be. And so I think that they need to own the lack of explanation and their role in causing some of this chaos at the nation's airports. Because listen, people were stopped coming into the country. Their phones are taken away from them. They can't communicate with their families, and I can't imagine that the people in Trump's administration knew that it was going to look like this 2 days onward.
What about that, Steve Rogers? I mean, the fact is even people who had green cards, there was some confusion around. Right. They had legal green cards to be here.
Maria, how soon we forget that several months ago, ISIS sent a very clear warning to this country that they're sending their fighters here. Those fighters aren't going to come armed like an invasion in World War II. They're going to come embedded in a lot of people traveling to this country. What President Trump did, it was a surprise, but it was a surprise to our enemies as well. So I think what he did sent a very clear message that anytime, any place, anywhere, the United States government is going to take the necessary action to protect its citizens.
Yeah, and then like right on cue, gentlemen, Congressman, 2 suspects were arrested in a shooting of a mosque in Canada last night. Okay, 6 people were killed, 8 others wounded. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau spoke out about the shooting. He called it a terrorist attack. But he's calling it a terrorist attack on Muslims. Congressman Walsh, the NYPD has increased security across all places of worship in New York City as a result of this just last night. How else do you expect security to change, and what about that?
Well, and it will, Maria, but Trudeau's reaction was hilarious. I mean, in a nanosecond, he called it terrorism, and in a nanosecond, he called it terrorism against Muslims. Whenever there's an act of Islamic terror, the people on the left are always hesitant to call it terrorism. Look, some of the rollout with what Trump did here may have been bumpy, and some of this may have been self-inflicted. But the chaos is here because this is a course change. This is a needed course change, and there are people in this country who don't want to accept it.
Congressman, this is Kirsten Hagelin. So, you know, I think that myself and a lot of Republicans are looking at this in a broad term, right, for the broad, overwhelming strategy of how we deal with the Middle East. What do you say to a lot of national intelligence organizations that say, you know, the real threat is homegrown terrorism? That's what we've seen in the last year, of course, the last 2 years. And additionally, this might give fuel to the fire of propagandists in the Middle East who want to say that Muslims are being attacked in the West, that, you know, that they don't want you in America. So what's going to be the long-term ideological strategy, right, to try to confront this at that level and, you know, pass the refugee or the immigration ban?
I don't think ISIS needs an excuse to behead people. They don't need extra fuel on the fire. They make up their excuses. Look, This is a battle. It's not just ISIS. It's al-Qaeda. Much of the Islamic world is caught up in this, and our side, our world, has not gotten serious about it. This is going to take an adjustment, but Donald Trump is trying to get our country serious about the real threat.
How do you think this plays out?
Well,
This is incredible.
I'll tell you, I think it'll play out very good for the United States because he is finally taking action. This country is finally taking action to protect itself, and the congressman is right. This is a course change, maybe a little painful, but I'd rather it be more painful for the enemies of this country than for the American people.
Because we talk about the broad agenda and what investors want out of this administration and what the American people, outside of, in terms of their wage growth and job creation, and the concern is now this dominates. How long does it dominate? Nobody knows, but this dominates so much that it gets in the way of all of those other agenda items, because at least in part this has pushed some Republicans, particularly in the Senate, we heard from them over the weekend, toward the Democrats. And so you don't want to unite at least a few members of your own party against you when it comes to pursuing everything else you got to get done. Everything else the American people need to get done. I think it's a question mark. If they can put this fire out in the next couple of days, it will certainly help push the rest of the agenda.
Well, we'll see. Congressman, we want tax reform. The people are expecting the Affordable Care Act to go away and to be changed. And by the way, let's point out, today the Senate is trying to end the debate on Secretary of State nominee Rex Tillerson, 3 p.m. Eastern. Also, the Senate Small Business Committee is voting on Linda McMahon to take over the Small Business Administration. Once he gets his cabinet in place, maybe we'll have more clarity. But he doesn't have his cabinet in place, and people are wondering if the Dems are stalling the process. We'll be watching that. Congressman Dennis Kucinich, Congressman Joe Walsh, good to see you both, gentlemen. Thank you. Thanks for weighing in.
Thanks,
Coming up,
Maria.